welcome to Leadership West April Lunch and Learn. And today we're going to talk about what is NASCAR, the history of racing in Arizona, with Alex Akers, who is currently one of our class 27 members. And we're just wrapping up. We're at the tail end of that, which is pretty exciting. He is with Signature Wealth Concepts, but don't let that deceive you. He knows a whole lot about money and the history of racing. So Alex, will let you take it away. And at the end, we've got Shelly Phillips, who will share a great opportunity for those on the call today to maybe catch a race in the fall. So with that, I just want to remind everybody, please mute your mics if you haven't already. And we will actually hold all questions until the end this go around. So with that, Alex, go ahead and take it away. He's a fantastic class member, Valley participant. He's really making his mark in the West Valley, and we cannot wait to see what he continues to do. And we're excited to have him not only as a member of Leadership West, but to hear from him today. Take it away.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. Well, good afternoon, everybody. So NASCAR is one of my biggest passions, and this year, in the past too, Michelle and others have always kind of asked me, like, what is NASCAR? Like, what's the big deal about it? People always ask me that in general, like, isn't it just left turns? Like, what's the big deal? So today I want to go over, what is NASCAR, but mainly just like, the history of it, where did it come from? A brief history, but at the same time discuss like what Arizona was, when it comes to racing back in the day. So the history of racing in Arizona. And then kind of look at too of like, what is NASCAR from the perspective of, as a fan, like how do you get into it? Like, what do you need to know? Because I got hooked into it back in 2002. And ever since then, it's just been a huge passion. So hopefully I can give you guys a couple nuggets to maybe take away and maybe try to get into it yourself. So to kind of start off with, I think it's always important to know, where did it come from? Okay? And this is kind of my favorite part. I was telling Michelle this earlier. So NASCAR, back in the 1920s and 1930s during Prohibition, we had the illegal process, the whole thing of moonshine, right, and alcohol. And the way to get this alcohol and this moonshine across, state lines and to run it illegally, they had to hire drivers, that could run away from cops. They had to have mechanics to build these cars to haul the liquor that can outrun the police. So it's a very outlaw type thing at that time. So a lot of drivers were hired guns to haul this liquor. At the same time, and you'll see too at the bottom, there's actually a car there. At present day, you can go to the NASCAR Hall of Fame and you can see one of the bootleggers' cars, which is pretty cool. So now with this, being these guys rough and tough, whatever, is, they wanted to kind of advertise themselves on who's the better driver at this given point in time. So on weekends when they weren't running moonshine and liquor for these bosses, is they would actually compete at local tracks and see who has the fastest cars and who's the best drivers. So it's kind of loosely, but that was just something that was fun on the weekends that these outlaws did. And then, kind of create this, I'd say it got very popular. Okay. So it was very growing. Spectators would come out, check out these races. It was taken off. Okay. But then 1940s, something happened. And we all know, World War II took place. Okay. So with this and the whole prohibition and bootlegging of moonshine, it kind of everything came to a standstill. You had all the drivers, mechanics, bootleggers, everybody went to the war. Okay. Either as a soldier, car manufacturers turned into manufacturers for tanks and airplanes. So vehicles weren't really being produced. So everything was a standstill from racing, okay, in the 1940s. When World War II finished in the mid of the decade, is drivers came back, particularly, let's just say this one on the left, his name is Red Byron. A lot of these drivers came back, or people came back, really that adrenaline rush still, whether it's soldiers, pilots, mechanics, they came back to the US when the war was done, really wanting that adrenaline rush. So you had this more drivers out and about wanting to race. You had mechanics from World War II wanting to come back and wanting to tinker with stuff. So they started tinkering with race cars. Okay. Red Byron in the bottom left, he was shot down over the Pacific. He was a gunman for B-24. He came back to the US and he actually lost all capability of his left leg. So with that, they actually set up his car where he could brake and clutch. This really cool, unique device that allowed him to do that. He became very popular. He was very winning. And with that, Americans really loved seeing this patriot, World War II patriot. They had someone to really cheer for, someone that they could really be proud of. So you had a lot of those kind of people coming back. And in the middle picture, that's Daytona Beach in the early 50s. So before Daytona, a lot of you guys might know Daytona is that big asphalt track. But at one time on Daytona Beach, they actually raced on the beach when the tide was low and the sand was hard packed. They would race around and there'd be just, dozens and dozens of cars. So that's how it originally started. Then at the same time on the right, you had, his name was Bill France Jr., and he had this vision. Everybody, whether it was moonshiners, World War II heroes, everybody was racing these cars at different locations throughout the US, mainly in the South, okay, so the Southeast. And he had a vision of coming together and having kind of one uniform thing, rules, manufacturers, everything being uniformed at one given time to make this maybe the biggest thing that anyone's ever seen. So his idea was that vision of creating some kind of uniformed series. So in 1959, a bunch of the manufacturers, these car owners, even moonshine runners, everybody came together at the Streamline Hotel in Florida, in Daytona Beach, Florida, for a couple of days to try to figure out what can be done. And during this time, through it all, they announced that they would create what's called the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing, rules and everything like that, also known as NASCAR. So the official year or date when NASCAR was born is in 1959, okay? And this kind of also implemented of everything being stock, okay? They wanted everyone to kind of run the same stuff and have it be all about the drivers, okay? So at the same time, before 1959, during this time, a big track was being built in Daytona Beach, Florida. So Bill France Jr. had a vision of this giant, massive track, bigger than any track in the whole world, that would reach speeds higher than anyone's ever seen, close to 200 miles an hour. And this was Daytona. So this is the Daytona International Speedway that we have today. Was started construction in 1957 and got completed in 1959. So right when NASCAR came about, we had this giant track that was building interest, that people wanted to see what was going to take place. Okay. So NASCAR started to do its thing. It took off. They started running at tracks all across, like I said, the Southeast, even the East Coast, places like Daytona. So Daytona, I'll let you guys know, that's the first race of the NASCAR season. It's always been that way. So rather than being the Super Bowl kind of at the end of the season, the NASCAR Super Bowl is at the very beginning. And it's the first race to kick off the season in February. Okay. So then usually you run out, throughout the year. Fasting forward to 1979. So this is a huge pivotal moment in NASCAR history. So till then, it was still a local thing. Only people in the Southeast really knew about NASCAR and what was going on. But in 1979, CBS was going to televise live coverage of the Daytona 500 from beginning to end. Okay. So at this time too, I'll mention is that there was a huge snowstorm in the East Coast, all east. So the whole country was pretty much shut down and forced to stay in their house. So they were kind of forced to watch TV, and a lot of people came across this Daytona 500 NASCAR thing. Okay. So the race kicked off. A lot of fans, the viewers were presented to a lot of great racing, bumping, banging, a lot of stuff they've never seen before. But the best part is at the very end, it came down to the last lap between two drivers, beating doors, bumping, banging one another, and then crashing on the last lap. First and second took each other out, okay? And then Richard Petty, who's this kind of idol in NASCAR, goes on to win the Daytona 500 that year, okay? Right when you think it's over, the live television cuts over to a fight in the infield. So those two drivers are actually fighting on live TV, duking it out. So with all that's going on, after that 1979 Daytona 500, literally overnight, NASCAR became the biggest sensation during that time, which was cool. So if it wasn't for the snowstorm, if it wasn't for this live coverage, this first time happening, NASCAR probably wouldn't be as big as it is today. So pivotal moment. Now, kind of going back is, during this time, what's Arizona doing? Like, what are they doing when it comes to the form of racing? So being that we're close to California, in the early days of racing, a lot of it had to do with drag racing. And the reason is California in the 50s and 60s, it was a lot of times about hot rods, that beach life, the Beach Boys, hot rods. So drag racing was the biggest form of motorsports in Arizona. You also had dirt track racing, a lot of open wheeled stuff. Again, during this time, no NASCAR. NASCAR wasn't even heard of at this point. So in the upper left, we had one of the tracks was the Arizona Fairgrounds. So you can still see those kind of stands today, but that's the Arizona Fairgrounds back in the early 40s. They had raced what's called midgets and sprint cars. To the upper right, that's a dragster at Mel Larson's Speedway in Northwest Phoenix, eventually became known as Speed World. So that was that track back in the day. The bottom left is Manzanita Speedway, which we lost about a decade ago, but that was a track that was huge in South Phoenix, known for its dirt track racing, sprint cars, to go watch on the Saturday night. And the bottom right is Beeline Dragway. And the cool thing about that, so Beeline was a very popular drag racing track, and that's my grandfather in the white shirt right there. Obviously the taller one, so you see where I get it from, but he drag raced out at Beeline. So that's kind of the history. So like I said, during this time, Arizona was mainly drag racing, hot rodders. We had Cruising Central in downtown Phoenix. That was what was going on. So in 1964, Phoenix Raceway was constructed. It was considered the Indianapolis of the West, right? We all know Indianapolis 500. So this was going to be a big track. It is mainly known for its open wheel racing during that time. So a lot of IndyCar, USAC, just a lot of, again, no NASCAR yet or stock cars, but strictly just IndyCar open wheeled. It also had a drag strip. So for 2 or 3 years, they did drag racing. You can kind of see it in the back, but there's a drag strip. And there was also a road course as well, too. So they would have like a Le Mans type style cars that would run as well. So again, Phoenix Raceway kicked off, and for the longest time, it was strictly just open wheel. So in 1988, NASCAR came to Phoenix Raceway for its first NASCAR Cup race. Alan Kulwicki was the first winner of the race. What's really cool at the bottom right, you'll see that's him after winning, but he was the very first person to do what's called a Polish victory lap, where you go backwards on the track and you wave to the fans. So he was the very first person to do that, and that took place at Phoenix Raceway, which is really cool. Okay. And then at the same time, too, in 1990, you also had Days of Thunder, the Tom Cruise movie that was filmed at Phoenix Raceway, where they basically stuck, cameras inside of race cars. They entered a few cars that just were there to film. It was a really cool process, and I recommend anyone, obviously, to go and watch that movie. Very cool. So some of the historical moments I just want to make sure I go over with Phoenix Raceway. Starting on the left, in 2012, we had the big brawl between Jeff Gordon and Clint Boyer, basically where someone paid back to someone else for something they did earlier on in the year. And a huge fight broke out after that happened. I mean, crews were going at it. The drivers started to, try to find each other to go at it. It was just chaos. But at the same time, it was national attention at that time, too. Then in 2007, in the middle, you had Jeff Gordon, who tied Dale Earnhardt for the most wins in 2007. So he went around Phoenix Raceway after winning with the number 3 flag, which was a really cool moment. Then down below, you have 2015, Dale Earnhardt Jr. won his final race before retiring at Phoenix Raceway. And then the upper right in 2016, the closest finish in NASCAR history at Phoenix Raceway, Harvick beat Edwards by 1/100th of a second. So very cool. And obviously 2020, everybody's proudest moment, especially my proudest moment, is actually having our championship race. So NASCAR's final race of the season to crown the champion, now taking place at Phoenix Raceway, which is huge. Okay. So that's kind of the Phoenix Raceway. Now jumping back to NASCAR. Okay, so what's NASCAR doing, during this time? So in the 1990s and 2000s, NASCAR starts booming. It starts to become one of the biggest viewership and biggest fan type sports in the world. So NASCAR starts to move west. Okay, so there's tracks, being built in California. The whole West Coast starts to see a lot of this stuff and a huge fan base. The biggest driver of this, or the reason for this, is we saw drivers like Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Tony Stewart, and Jimmy Johnson start to come about during this time. But I'll point out Jeff Gordon, when he came into NASCAR in the early 90s, he was this kid from California, no, kind of background in NASCAR, but he put NASCAR into the Hollywood type fare and brought with that a lot of new fans from the West Coast because he was a West Coast person. Okay. So during this time, viewership, like I said, and popularity, it peaked in 2005, but up until then, NASCAR was second in viewership behind the NFL at that given time. And you can kind of see in the background some of these tracks, but they were selling on tracks, 200, 250,000 fans for each race. So sold out races, mainstream media, sponsorship money. You can even see on the bottom right, I even added some drivers that were introduced in early 2000. You might have heard of Ricky Bobby. So even movies were being made about NASCAR, which is even giving it more in the limelight. So with that too is, now we kind of gone through kind of how NASCAR came to be, where it kind of went from this southern type sport into this huge national audience. Is, how does it work? What's to it more than just the left turns? So the first thing is the NASCAR team. So what you guys see on track is just the car. So behind the scenes, you have, corporations that are putting in money and stuff that's going on. So Hendrick Motorsports, starting at the top, that is the corporation that owns teams, employees that fix up these cars and build them. Okay, so for example, you have the number 48 team and the number 9 team, for example. They have a total of 4 drivers, but I want to focus on those. Within those teams, you're going to have your pit crews, your engineers, your drivers involved in that. You're also going to have marketing, PR, people building stuff at the shop. I mean, there's a lot to it. I always tell people that goes before the car actually hit the track. So, and cost per team. So just one of those teams is about $15 to $20 million per year to run. So a lot of times when you guys see this sponsorship, whether it's, M&Ms or Coca-Cola, the reasons they have a lot of that stuff and they have to is to be able to fund these teams throughout the year. So it's a very high pressure business model and stuff as well too. So just kind of, for example, like looking at this car, a lot of people would click on to watch a race and be like, oh, cool, it's a Napa car. Awesome. Maybe a couple of things of, Talladega Nights type stereotypes in their mind. But when you look at this, the cool behind the scenes is, okay, you have the driver who's driving, right? He's probably sitting in a car that's maybe 100 to 120 degrees, inside there driving. You got the sponsorships there that are paying all that money every race for him to go on the track. You have the engine underneath the hood that's been tuned, fine-tuned, everything's precise. You have the tires, you have the track with other drivers, they're racing. But what happens when the temperatures change in the track? What happens when there's, something happens and the track changes and there's oil on the track? There's a lot of stuff that's behind the scenes that can change throughout the race. And it's always important for engineers, not the drivers, but engineers to know that throughout too. So the one thing with this is, driver development. A lot of times we'll see when we turn on NASCAR, we see that championship driver, but we don't really know like where they came from, what sacrifices they've had to put in, just like any other sport. So for example, starting off, someone like this, Chase Elliott, I'll mention who he is in a second, but Chase Elliott, starts in go-karts at 5 years old, right? His mom and dad get him a go-kart because he wants to start, racing and wants to be a race car driver someday. So he starts off doing that. And then he goes into, maybe a little higher series, maybe moves to North Carolina and wants to be a part of this NASCAR scene because it's very big in the East Coast, very popular. So he moves up, maybe mom and dad also sacrifice, maybe putting up a second mortgage on their house, selling their house, traveling across the US. A lot goes into it, especially if their kids are dedicated. And then they go into these, what you'd say a second tier series. So with the series, you have the Cup Series, but below it, you have the ARCA Menard Series, the Truck Series, and Xfinity Series. Whenever you hear someone mention that, think of that as just like college football. So you have the NFL, which is the Cup Series, the big premier league. And then below that, you have your second tiers, which is where drivers develop, hone their skills, and hopefully get hired or drafted to drive into a Cup Series team someday. So then you got basically Chase Elliott, who goes through all those series, gets to the Cup Series, and then last year wins that NASCAR Cup Championship. So starting at that 5-year-old kid, through all the sacrifices, which is why you always see a lot of emotion, he's finally made it to that top level and winning a championship with that. So always the big question is, are NASCAR drivers athletes? That's always the biggest debate. Yeah, it's not necessarily with muscles and stuff, but they drive in cars, like I said, of temperatures to 100 to 160 degrees for 3 hours. They have to have that sharp mental focus to drive at 200 miles an hour and be very precise every moment and not lose time. They're pulling G forces at 3 Gs, which is the same as a space shuttle launch. They have a 10-month race season. So they race from February all the way till November every weekend. And then the crash impacts, some of these Gs they're pulling is outrageous, 100 and 120 Gs if there's a crash. So I would say I would compare this type of athleticism to maybe like cycling, like a Lance Armstrong, where it's all about endurance, not necessarily just about strength and stuff. Okay? I won't get into NASCAR playoff stuff too much, but the best thing to know when it comes to this is we have a playoff format where, it starts off and there's a knockout round in the last 10 races of the season. So NASCAR is a 36 race long season, and the last 10 races is the playoffs. Now with the playoffs, everyone's still racing race to race every weekend. So even though you have 16, 12, or 8 eligible to win the championship, everybody's still racing for a win. So unlike other sports where you get knocked out, everyone's still competing every weekend. You just have some that are going for the championship. Okay? So current Arizona NASCAR drivers, to follow. One is Alex Bowman from Tucson, Arizona. He actually won last weekend. And so he's in the playoffs. When you win a race, you're automatically in the playoffs. Okay. You have Michael McDowell, who won the Daytona 500 earlier this year. His first win came at the Daytona 500. So he's in the playoffs. So those are the two from Arizona to root for definitely this year. And how to get involved. So the first thing is pick a driver. I always tell people, if you go to a race, I don't have anybody to cheer for, it gets really boring because it's almost like going to a football game. You don't care for either team. So pick a driver for sure. And then follow the races. Like start watching NASCAR on TV. It's the same 40 drivers every Sunday competing. So you'll see the same people like Alex Bowman and Michael McDowell. So follow their careers, follow them on Instagram, learn more about them, their history, their sacrifices, and really develop yourself into, understanding that person. Like I said, watch the races on TV. The three I recommend people to watch if you really want to get into it that are exciting and chaotic is Daytona, Talladega, and Bristol. Those are the three I recommend. If you start off at the other ones, you might get into it, but some races could be a little drug out and not as exciting for a newer fan. And third, attend a race. Like sit high up. Like Julie's always discussed at Phoenix Raceway. Sit high up. Rent a scanner and headset so you guys can listen to the drivers. That's always the cool thing. You can listen to in-car audio, which is unedited. Just to let you guys know. And then check out the infield. Check out the infield on Friday when they practice. Get to see the drivers. Maybe that driver you've been following. Go say hi to them. Get a picture with them. It's really cool to do. So NASCAR today, kind of going to today's times, it's very diverse. I think that's the best explanation of it. You have Haley Deegan, who's a female coming up through. She's in the truck series right now, but she's going to get to cut because she has a lot of talent. So you have a female coming up through the ranks. You have Daniel Suarez and his whole fan base, the Daniel's Amigos. He's from Mexico. So you have a Hispanic driver who's racing right now, doing very well. And then you have Bubba Wallace, who's the African-American driver who's doing very well in opening doors for younger African-Americans. And he's partnered up and teamed up with Michael Jordan this year. So he's in a very good ride. But the biggest thing is just diversity. It's one of the only sports where men and women can compete on the same field, which is really cool. Okay. And I'll leave you guys on this note too, is these are three things I definitely consider checking out. One is the NASCAR Rise of American Speed. It's a documentary series. You can just find it on YouTube or Amazon. It's all about NASCAR and the history of it in more detail. Really cool. Check out Phoenix Kart Racing Association. So if you want to see, kids starting at 5 years old, and you never know. I grew up racing go-karts at Phoenix Kart Racing Association. And a lot of the kids make it to the big leagues. So it's really cool to support some of our younger ones that are really trying to make it in the world. And then this Sunday, mark it down, but this Sunday at 11 a.m. on Fox is Talladega, the Talladega race for the season. It's chaotic, it's crazy. You're gonna probably leave it with your eyes wide open, but I definitely consider watching this Sunday. It's one of the most exciting races of the year. Okay. How did I do? I tried to rush through it. I think I'm a minute over. Does anybody have any questions at all?
There was a question in the chat, if you want to grab that, Alex.
Yeah, I gotta figure out how to stop sharing actually. Here we go. And I'll mention too, if anyone ever wants to learn more about this stuff, I'd be more than happy to grab coffee. As you can see, I get very excited about it. So I'd be more than happy to meet for coffee and to go into stuff further, but let me see the chats. Vehicles are as warm as they are. Type of cooling system, uniforms. Yeah, so it's very similar to NASA. So when NASCAR drivers have a cooling system through their helmet and it goes through their suit to cool their bodies, but I will mention it's not as cold as most people think. And then you mentioned about merchandising. So yeah, that's a big thing too, is, drivers have to really promote themselves as someone who's professional, friendly, because they're trying to get sponsors, they're trying to get fans, because that's what pays for them in their careers. So it's very important to not screw that up, you can say. Anything else?
Do we have any other questions?
I do some pressure from Phoenix Raceway.
Well, and with that, I guess, Shelly, if you want to take it from there, another way that people can get involved this year.
Yeah, I think Alex did an amazing job presenting on what NASCAR is and the exciting points that we have here. I know he mentioned that that Talladega is coming up this weekend. Definitely one to watch here. We're super excited on our end to watch our counterparts, race around that huge super speedway. So Talladega is a super speedway, so it's a little bit, not a little bit, a lot longer than Phoenix Raceway, only a mile long. So a lot more action and speed to go there. And we're only a mile long, but these cars can still get up to 150, 200 miles an hour down our back straightaway. And then they have to slam on the brakes to get back into the corners out here. But another way to get involved, Alex, I know you're already a ticket holder here to Phoenix Raceway. Saw those pictures come through, but definitely reach out to myself as well. I oversee our group sales here at Phoenix Raceway. I work with lots of different businesses, municipalities, tourism companies, as well as, just a family that's looking to come out. So be more than happy to share my contact information at the track and get you guys into some of those exciting seats higher up here at Phoenix Raceway for our championship weekend.
I will mention real quick too, please follow Phoenix Raceway social media on Instagram. They have the best social media account. It's really good to follow. I highly recommend it.
And it's on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram is typically where I'm on most of the time, away from Facebook stuff. So yeah, definitely recommend it.
I think you have a couple more questions too in the chat. And if you don't mind reading the question or reiterating what you're answering, that'd be great.
Yeah, so NASCAR's not only left turns, they also go right now. There's road courses, and actually this year there's more road courses than ever. It's something they're implementing a lot more in NASCAR. So they do go right. I'm trying to think, NASCAR raced on dirt this year for the first time a couple of weeks ago, which is really cool. So NASCAR is in this kind of phase where, they're recovering from 2008, honestly, ever since the recession. It's been trying to get back to where it was in the early 2000s, and they're doing a lot of diversity stuff. They're doing a lot of this kind of different things to intrigue people. So it's kind of a really exciting time to be a part of it, to follow a lot of it too.
A lot of people said thank you. Yeah, every time I talk to you, I'm ready to go watch a race. And it's something that was never really on my radar before, even though we live out here not very far from Phoenix Raceway. But there's Alex's information in the chat.
I put my cell on there. So this Sunday, like if you guys I do this for people all the time, especially in our class. If you're watching a race like this Sunday and you have questions like, why did this happen? What is this? Just text me and I'll be more than happy to kind of explain it real quick. So I enjoy doing that.
Great. Oh, and then Shelly just put her information also in the chat for anybody that wants to contact her. There we go. Put it up there too. For any sales this fall, correct? November?
Correct. November 5th through the 7th, we'll be hosting 3 unique days of racing, but also crowning 4 champions. So you'll be able to watch all 4 series here of NASCAR coming up in a course of 3 days. So we're very excited.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. A little bit different, but NASCAR is such a huge part of the West Valley and a revenue driver and just a fun thing to do in March and in November. So we were grateful to have Alex present today, kind of share a bit about it. I think if we're not in that world, it kind of just sits down there. So I've been so excited to learn more about this amenity and asset that we have right here in Avondale, Arizona. So thank you, Alex, for your time. And we want to thank everybody for attending today. And we will have our next topic announced soon. But have a great rest of your week for everybody on there. And Alex, I guess you'll stick around for a few minutes to answer any more questions if anybody has it, or Shelly. But with that, we will end today, and we just thank you for attending.